In this video, we're going to talk about control games. And in a sense, you could say that a control game is an extension of the power games that I talked about in the previous video. Or you can say that a control game is a form of power game. But there are some differences. And what I'll do in this video is I will focus on us as spiritual people. How can we avoid being controlled by others? And if we have been controlled in our lives, how can we free ourselves from that control? So that'll be the underlying theme. But let's just start with this. Power games, control games, what's the difference? Well, obviously one way to control other people is through raw physical force. You put somebody in prison and you are controlling them. Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union had the power to kill anybody that objected to his rule, and he imprisoned and killed many people. It's estimated 21 million people inside the Soviet Union were killed during Stalin's reign, and so that was obviously a form of control. The problem with this form of control is people know they're being controlled. So they are longing for freedom, and they might resist your control in various ways, and they might gradually mount enough resistance to it that they might free themselves from their control or overthrow you. If you're a dictator, for example, and you have the kind of power that Stalin had, you'll never know whether somebody's going to overthrow you. So the result of this was that Stalin was basically paranoid. He didn't trust any of the people who were close to him, which is in a sense strange because the people who were close to Stalin at the time, they had demonstrated they were completely loyal to Stalin. They were willing to do whatever he told them to do because they knew otherwise they would get their heads chopped off or sent to Siberia, whatever. And so they had demonstrated their loyalty, but he still didn't trust him. Why? Because he was a victim of his own control game. So what Stalin did, even though he knew he could control people physically, he went a step further. He couldn't stop himself. It's like he was on this downward slide that he couldn't stop. So it wasn't enough to have the physical power to control or to kill anybody who objected to him. He created something called Red Terror. And Red Terror was a situation where nobody could feel safe. Now you would think that if you have a dictator and if you're doing everything he wants you to do, you should be safe. But Stalin went a step further. He had these killing squads that would kill people randomly, even the people who were close to him. Once in a while, he had some of them killed because he wanted people to be so fearful of being killed that they never dared to object to his rule. But the problem, of course, with this was that his paranoia very quickly got out of control. And so he was more controlled by his desire for control than anyone else was. And eventually, it destroyed him psychologically, emotionally. And so what is the smarter way to control people? Because, of course, everybody in the Soviet Union knew they were being controlled. What's the smarter way to control people? It is to get into their minds in such a way that they don't even realize they're being controlled. They might agree with you, they might agree with your ideology, your religion. I mean, take one of the most obvious forms of control from history, the Catholic Church. For over 1,000 years, the Catholic Church had an iron grip on people in Europe. And although they had some physical means of power also, it was first of all in people's minds because they thought that they couldn't be saved and go to heaven without the Catholic Church. And if they weren't going to heaven, they were going to hell for all eternity. And so that's an example of how you get into people's minds, makes them believe in something, and then they can be controlled. Religion has been one tool, political ideology, communism, capitalism, materialism, scientific materialism. There are any number of these. In fact, even a spiritual New Age philosophy or guru can be a means for controlling people. So it's safe to say that all of us who are spiritual people, we started out our lives as being subjected to various control games. Could have been from our society, it could have been from religion, it could have been from other people. Because often parents, of course, want to control their children, and we might meet other people. It can even be children, other children in school who want to control us. As adults, it can be people at work, supervisors, bosses at work, or whatever. We can also be a spouse, where we have a love relationship, quote-unquote love relationship, to a person who is seeking to control us. It can be children that are seeking to control their parents. So, again, we who are spiritual people, many of us didn't grow up being exposed to these really obvious means of physical control. Some of us did. I know many people who grew up in the Soviet Union. But if you grew up in a Western country or democracy, we probably weren't exposed to this very raw physical means of control. But we were exposed to psychological control, and often from other people. In fact, we could say that 98% of the people on this planet are being controlled by a hidden power elite that we don't really know who they are and how they control our societies. So we could say that for us who are spiritual people, why are we on the spiritual path? It's partly because we want to be free. Free from what? Free from control, from outside ourselves. And you can look at the spiritual path as a process whereby we gradually regain more and more freedom. But what does that mean? Well, the one aspect of freedom, we might say it's the omega aspect, is freedom from something. Something outside ourselves, other people, the power elite, physical force. But the real freedom is, the alpha aspect of freedom is inner freedom. Freedom in our own minds, or you could say freedom from our own minds, means freedom from our egos and the separate selves that make up the ego. I talked about these subconscious selves, separate selves, in many videos, and as I also explained, there's a conglomerate of these that make up the ego. And so, how do you then escape control? From others or from something in your own mind? How do you escape control? You have to overcome the desire to control, the need to control. Because, as I explained with Stalin, if you have this extreme need to control others, you're the first one who's being controlled by this need, by this desire. And in seeking to find ways to control others, you are putting yourself in a mental box, and you have to live up to the definition of who you are according to that mental box. You first have to try and control yourself in order to control others. So what gives us this need for control? Well, it's the ego. I have explained before that we start at the 48th level of consciousness, where we have a certain sense of connection to our higher selves. This happened for most of us many lifetimes ago, when we either first came to Earth or when we were created as original inhabitants of the Earth. So we have some sense of connection, and we can continue to expand that sense of connection, leading to oneness. But we also have the option to go below the 48th level, where we have the sense of connection. And then we go into what I call separation. When we go into separation, there's a certain sense of loss. We don't understand consciously what it is, but we feel a sense of loss, and this is what creates the ego. So the ego is created to compensate or cover over that sense of loss or aloneness. And how does it do it? Well, the only way to really overcome the sense of loss is to reestablish our connection to our higher selves. But that is, of course, the one thing that the ego cannot do, and it doesn't want us to do, because if we did, we wouldn't need the ego anymore. So what the ego does, it seeks to do something, create something in this world that gives us a sense that we are in control, that we have control of our lives. Therefore, we don't need to feel a sense of loss. We don't need to feel a sense of aloneness because we're in control. And the way the ego creates this sense of control is, of course, by using what I call the duality consciousness, where there's always the two polarities. So that means the ego is using one thing to give the impression, create the appearance of control, but it will always be threatened by its dualistic opposite. So you have the classical dynamic of this in many religions who talk about God. There's a God who's almighty and who's good. So if you believe in this God and follow the prescripts of this religion, you will have control of your life because God is going to protect you. But God has an opposite, the devil. And you never know when the devil is going to come in mysteriously, even though you are praying to God and following all these religions, and bad things could happen to you. So you see what happens inevitably when you go into this ego game of control is that you have a problem. You have a promise that there's a solution to the problem, but you always have the fear that there's also a threat. Whatever it is, you know. And so there are three things that people traditionally try to control. It's God, but as I said, there's always an opposite. It's our outer circumstances. It can be nature at a larger scale, but in our personal lives, we seek to create our outer circumstances. And then it's other people. So we seek to control other people. And for most people, you know, we seek to create God by accepting some kind of religion. And many people also seek to create their outer circumstances by accepting either a religion or some kind of philosophy like manifestation or positive mental attitude or whatever. So you, or praying to God or whatever. It's you think that you have some control over your outer circumstances. But the way to seek control that most people can deal with is seeking to control other people. I've talked about it before. Essentially, we are always trying to create, to change our own state of mind so we overcome the sense of loss. So we feel inner peace, we feel safe, we feel secure. And in order to do this, we are trying to control other people and our external circumstances and God. So nothing from outside ourselves can disturb our inner sense that we are safe, we're okay. But of course, as we have all experienced, controlling other people is not very easy. And this means that you could say that the earth is a schoolroom for helping people learn how to overcome this control game, because everybody is seeking to control everybody else. And that means that everybody is in constant tension or conflict with other people. And so inevitably there'll be clashes and nobody really feels they're in control. So as a spiritual person, the best thing you can do is look at this and say, okay, I understand that I grew up in a certain situation with other people, and I understand that I have a certain psychology I brought with me from past lives. So it's understandable that so far in my life I have played these control games, seeking to control others, to change my own state of mind and feel at peace. But I've had enough of it. I really think this is too much. It takes up too much energy, too much attention. How do I get out of it? And there is really only one way to get out of it. And that is to realize that if you have a choice to make, basically. You have to choose. What is it you're seeking to control? Are you seeking to control external circumstances, including other people? Are you seeking to control internal circumstances, your state of mind? And as I've said, we're always seeking to control our state of mind. Most people are engaged in doing it in this convoluted, reversed process of seeking to control outer circumstances because we think that if we just have the ideal outer circumstances, we're going to feel at peace, we're going to feel secure, we may even be happy. This is the consumer culture we grew up in. Buy this and you'll be happy. And it, of course, never happens. So the choice we have to make as spiritual people, we have to come to a point where we say, this is madness. And just because everybody else around me is engaged in this madness, I don't want to do it anymore. I've had enough of it. And so now the challenge is to retool our thinking, our approach to life, the way we look at life, where we start looking at our reactions and seeing which of our reactions are related to seeking to control something outside ourselves. And as I've explained in other videos, the ego is made up of all of these subconscious selves. And there are many of them. And there are many of them that are relating to seeking to control something. And we can't see them all at once. We're not meant to see them all at once. So we just have to start somewhere. So we have to look at, you can ask yourself, what gives me the biggest sense of frustration in my life right now? What's the biggest sense of frustration? And I think most people will find when you do this that it's because there's some aspect of your outer situation that you are seeking to control, but you can't control it. And this creates frustration. So how do you deal with that? Well, you look at this and you realize this comes not from you, the conscious you, as I've talked about. It comes from one of these separate subconscious selves. That's part of the ego. So it's really an ego game you're playing. And perhaps if it's other people that are involved, they are also playing an ego game, and that's why they don't want to be controlled by you. They won't let you control them because they're trying to control you so they can change their state of mind. So you see people who have been locked in these kind of conflicts for their whole lives. If you look back, you could see many people have been locked in these for lifetimes. There are people who have been fighting with each other for lifetimes. That's why they have again and again and again embodied in close proximity as family members, spouses, or whatever. So you simply have to say, well, is it likely these other people are going to change? Probably not. But since I'm a spiritual person, what can I do? I can look at myself. I can change. I can decide. And really, it's not a matter of getting control. This is the magic of this teaching that the Ascended Masters have given about the subconscious selves. Because the subconscious self always projects that there's a problem. So in other words, if only you manage to control your spouse and make him or her stop doing this particular thing, then you will feel you're in control, then you'll feel safe. But even if that outer condition was fulfilled exactly the way you think it is, you wouldn't feel at peace because you still have the subconscious self that's driving you to change this particular condition. And as soon as that particular condition is fulfilled, the subconscious self is going to point to another condition. Oh no, you're still not feeling at peace? Well, that's because there's another condition you haven't controlled either. So now you need to control this. And you can continue to do this for the rest of your life and for many future lifetimes. So there comes a point where you have to do what the Masters are saying. You step back, you look at this, you say, is it really me who has it need to control this particular circumstance? Or is it a separate entity in my subconscious mind, namely this subconscious self, that is the focus of this need? And then you can look at why. What's the belief behind it? What is the belief that says, I have to control this and then something will happen, or something bad will not happen. Something good will happen or something bad will not happen. What's the belief? And if you can step back enough, kind of, withdraw yourself from this self, and this is what I've said about the conscious you. It has the ability to step outside these selves. The conscious you creates the self, but doesn't become the self. So that's why you can step outside of them. And when you look at them from the outside, you see it's just a self. It has a certain consciousness, but it's based on a belief. And that belief is an illusion. Then you can let it go. It's not a matter of solving the outer problem that the self is pointing to. It's a matter of seeing the self and just letting it go, letting it die. because you stop feeding it your energy, your attention. And that's the only way to overcome the control games, because it's your desire to control something that allows other people to control you. Take the Catholic Church again. The Catholic Church did two things. They induced the fear of going to hell, which was very easy back then, where in the Middle Ages people had a very difficult life. So they induced this fear of going to hell. They were very superstitious also. And then they presented a solution. You go to heaven instead. But to do that, you have to let the outer church, the man-made church here on earth, control you, control every aspect of your life and your thinking. So surrender control in order to avoid something bad and get something good. But why would people surrender their control? Because they had a desire inside their minds to control their inner experience, their state of mind. And the outer church promised them that if you surrender that, you can feel at peace because you know you're going to heaven. But of course, that meant people were controlled from the baptism to the funeral, and you certainly didn't grow spiritually from it. And of course, people didn't go to heaven either, because they weren't ready to ascend. So anyway, what I'm saying is, you have to gradually, and it can't be done all at once, but you have to gradually uncover the fears you have. And as I said, this springs from the creation of the ego. You lose the sense of connection to your higher self, you will have fears. And there are two fears. One is that something is going to happen to you, something unpleasant, something bad is going to happen to you. The other is that something pleasant, something good, something you want is not going to happen. And of course, the ordinary everyday experience of life for most people is that there are certain things we would like to see happen that are not happening. There are certain things we would like to avoid, but they are happening. So you're always caught in this, push-pull between trying to get something you want and avoid something you don't want. But where does this come from? It comes from the very core of the ego. The very core of the ego. And it can be very subtle to grasp this. I'm not saying that you can grasp this just from this explanation, but I've also approached it in many other videos. But basically, when you see yourself as a connected being, you have a certain, first of all, you don't feel alone. You are connected to something. You can still have a difficult life. There can be difficult outer circumstances you're going through. But the whole idea of being connected is that you can expand your sense of connection. And ultimately, what makes you feel at peace or feel fulfilled is to expand your sense of connection so you're experiencing this flow of spiritual energy, spiritual light from your I am presence, from your higher self. That's the ultimate sense of fulfillment. Now, when you lose that connection by going below the 48th level, you go into this sense of loss, and you feel a sense of loss. You feel incomplete. And that's why, instead of looking to expand your sense of connection, you're looking to get something in this world. But there is always the fear that you might not get what you want, and that certain things will happen that you absolutely don't want. So we can also say that as long as you're connected and you're walking this path of self-transcendence, you may still experience some limiting, unpleasant circumstances. But you will always have the sense you can transcend them. When you go into separation, you don't have the sense you can transcend it. You will feel you are trapped in these circumstances. Where there's a limitation, you feel trapped in it. You feel powerless to change it. And that's why you seek to, because you can't transcend it. You can't do, it's like I said, you can't just step back and let the self die. You have to manifest the outer conditions in order to change your state of mind. That's how you see it. It's the only way you can see it when you're in separation. So now that gets you on this treadmill of you are seeking to own certain things, and you are seeking to disown or avoid others. So you're running towards something, you're running away from something in this world. When you are on the path of self-transcendence, the circumstances in this world are just here at this level. But you know you can always transcend it by going beyond it. And what does that really mean? Well, it actually means that for us who have found the spiritual path and who still have some of these subconscious selves that were created below the 48th level, what it really means is that we gradually let these selves die so we attain greater and greater inner freedom, because there's nothing that pulls on our minds. You have to have this, you have to avoid this. And when we are letting a self die, what are we doing? Well, you may remember that Jesus 2,000 years ago made a pretty cryptic statement. He who seeks to save his life shall lose it, but he who is willing to save his life for my sake shall find eternal life. And what that means is, what is your life? The life he's talking about in the he who seeks to save his life. It's the life that you see through that filter of the ego, through these subconscious selves, where you think, I have to have this, I have to avoid that. This becomes a perception filter. It's like putting on the color glasses, you're looking through it. And you think you absolutely, in order to have peace or be safe, you have to have this, you have to avoid that. This is your life. Your whole life is eaten up by this. Seeking to get, seeking to avoid. Push, pull. And when you are willing to let one of these selves die, you follow Christ, which is the one mind, and you step one step closer to oneness with your higher self. And the ultimate sense of peace of mind, the ultimate sense of security, the ultimate sense of fulfillment is oneness with your higher self, which you achieve at the moment you ascend at the 144th level of consciousness. However, if you look at the scale I've talked about, let's say you start at the 48th level. Well, you have taken on 96 levels of illusions in order to descend to that level. The conscious you has taken on these illusions. And now you're looking up towards your higher self through all these illusions, and they keep you separated. Then you might have taken on some illusions below the 48th level, which keep you even more separated. So the more illusions you let go of, the higher you go in consciousness, the closer you get to oneness with your I am presence. And the more secure you feel, the more at peace you feel, the more free you feel, the more happy you feel. Because ultimately, none of these earthly desires of wanting this, of wanting to avoid that, they're never going to be fulfilling. They're never going to give you what you really need to feel at peace or in harmony or feel fulfilled. So that's why these teachings about these separate selves are so important, because it's really it's the only way to overcome all problems, you could say, but it's certainly the only way to overcome these control issues. Because the subconscious selves can only seek control. They want to control everything. And as I said, as long as you are trying to control something in this world, you are being controlled. Because you have put yourself in this mental box as this being. Take note of this. You have created an image of yourself, that I'm this incomplete being, and I need something in this world in order to feel complete or safe or free. I need something from this world. Because we all experience it's difficult to get something from this world. So the only real way to freedom is to let go of the self that makes it seem like you need something from this world, until you gradually become more and more aware that I'm a spiritual being. I am this conscious you. I'm not the outer personality. I'm not defined by anything on earth, anything in the outer world. I'm not defined by my physical body. I'm not defined by my emotions. I'm not defined by my thoughts. I'm not even defined by my deeper sense of identity. Nothing in this world, the four lower bodies, the identity, mental, emotional, and physical, defines me, because I am pure awareness. I'm none of this. And when you return to that state of pure awareness, that's the ultimate freedom or peace. And so, again, this talk is based on this book, Freedom from Ego Games. And there's a lot more depth and detail in this chapter on control games than I've given you here. My goal was really just to get you started on seeing the control games and seeing why it's important to overcome them, and what's the key to overcoming them. So the ego will project at you that the key to overcoming being controlled by others is for you to attain ultimate control over others. Then you won't feel controlled. But as I've tried to explain, the only key to overcoming control is really to overcome these subconscious selves that make you feel you have to control things in the world. So the key to freeing yourself from all forms of external control is to free yourself from the internal control that makes you think you have to control something.